So
this segment brought to you by
make sure,
Dairy Queen.
Make sure you get it right this time, unlike you did last
Yeah,
time.
yeah, isn't it funny? You think caribou in your head and out of your mouth comes Starbucks. Sorry,
Yeah.
caribou. DQ something different.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So let's talk. So we're gonna talk about the silver chair today.
Sorry, I'm having a moment.
Yeah. I'll have one too. I love ice cream.
Mm-hmm. Strawberry delight. They do make a mean shake.
Yeah.
All right. The silver chair.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So.
Fire away, man.
Yeah. So what's your favorite? As you're eating, sorry. Tell me about what's some of your favorite parts of the book or whatever.
Well.
Yeah. Right.
There's so much good stuff in this book.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of being underground as long as these guys are, is one thing that's just, kind of amazing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
To actually think about, like, completely still, no air movement, just the staleness of a realm beneath ground.
Sounds like the definition of hell to some of us.
Oof, sounds awful, and how they say in here, like, to miss the wind, to actually miss it. Sometimes you get in a windstorm. We usually get one or two really powerful straight line wind storms where you feel like everything's going to uproot and just go flying away.
Yeah, or like I remember riding my bike and having to like fight against the wind and how much you hate the wind or whatever. But yeah,
right.
I think about missing it too.
To be underground for such a length of time, and to forget how much you love things like fresh air,
and the
sunshine,
sun.
Wind,
Yeah.
all that stuff. So there are some things in this book that are, really kind of startling.
Mm-hmm.
The other things that come to mind right off the top, two of them. One is the Parliament of Owls, which of course is what a group of owls is called. But this is like an actual parliament, an actual meeting of owls. So he kind of throws in a double whatever. It's actually, that chapter or whatever is actually called A Parliament of Owls, isn't it? And
yes.
And they kind of set off on this journey to recover the prince,
Mm-hmm. And that whole scene is kind of funny in its own way because they're like, "Oh, we couldn't help you because you'd want to travel by day and we'd want to travel by night, so wouldn't do." Yeah.
Too true. All that stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is they travel north, and I just remember from biographies of Lewis this notion that he had that north is always best, or like everything north. When you move north, you move in the right direction almost, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, then he writes a book where they move north into this land of the giants, and it's certainly not this, bed of roses like he had in his head as a kid. I don't know where he gets this notion like north is the right direction and south is the wrong direction.
And in the States we're like, move south, it's nice down there, let's move to Florida.
Yeah.
Let's go to Florida, let's go.
Exactly, so it's just funny, although, most of us who grew up Yankees, Northerners, it's a real adjustment. Like, I think it was for my brother, a real adjustment. Moving south and moving into Southern culture. It's a different culture.
Oh yeah, it is.
It's a huge country, and you got the heat, and you have just a different pace of life, maybe, and stuff like that.
The grammar you have to learn to excuse.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, those were in the
info
booth. Yeah. Well, we'll have to put them out of the.
Are they? Do you have any idea where the lights were out there?
They're right on top, but it's locked again.
Yeah, I've got a key though.
Okay. Yeah, it's right when you walk in, it's straight ahead.
If they'll fit in there.
Yeah, I think they will.
Will they?
I think so.
Because I put two in a box, and it was like, are any more going to go in there?
Well, you can just lay them on top.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean,
bag and then lay them on.
It's kind of like open-ended, that box, so
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it should work.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
But but anyway, or the grammar you have to learn to excuse the horrible grammar too.
Yeah. Kind of like they, I'm sure, would say we have to learn to excuse the, oh boy, you betcha.
And the bad manners.
Yeah, and probably the rudeness, although we're not exactly rude here.
We just don't say yes ma'am and yes sir enough for their taste.
Northern coastal areas must be a real shock to a southerner, like, you guys are so rude.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
but
anyway.
Well, I know, I have my whole ranking of the books, which ones are my favorite. And the Silver Chair isn't my absolute favorite of the books, but I will say, I think Puddleglum is probably one of my absolute favorite characters of the books. In all of the books, I would definitely say. I don't know about you, but
Silver Chair has a couple of moments that are among my favorites, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Puddleglum's right at the center of that one, stamping on the fire. Maybe the best Narnian moment. I mean, I don't know. But he is also so wonderful because, I don't know, he's probably like me. Like, capable of great things, but often such a drag and so negative and so whatever, you know. And then out of nowhere, like this moment of brilliance kind of thing. And I feel like he's like the Eeyore of Narnia.
Yeah.
Except Eeyore never seems to really have a redeeming quality.
And he's, and I know what's so funny about when Eustace and Jill are talking to him about, like, you know, looking for Prince Brilliant and all that kind of stuff, and they're like, well, can you help us? And he's like, they're finally picking up the fact that he's planning to come with them, not just tell them, not point them in the right direction, say, go that way, you know, stick them to the dog or whatever.
Right.
He's, you know, he's planning to go with them, and they're having this whole, like, and he's like, well, I need to go. I need to be sobered down a little bit. The other marshmallows say I'm too flighty, don't take life seriously enough.
Right.
And that's like,
exactly.
And I remember listening to that intro with my mom, and my mom being like, what does that tell you? You know, and trying to be a teacher, you know, be in the teacher moment. And I said, I don't know what. And she said, they're even worse than Puddleglum. That means the other marshmallows and pickles are even worse.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine, you know, because he's always prefacing things with like, oh, I don't suppose we'll return at all, and probably die 1,000 agonies, you know, like always this stuff. Just the depths of despair, as Anne of Green Gables would say. But I just, he is such a almost comically absurd character with his chronic negativity. But then, you know, when it comes down to it, he's one of these, you know, we've all known people or know people that are like this. They're just crusty and hard and harsh and whatever, and on it goes. But really, they have a heart of gold and would do anything for you. And so that's kind of who Puddleglum is. He's really a person of great character and bravery, trapped in this wimpy frog-like frame with a chronic pessimism bred into him from birth. Yeah, it's just, he's a very unique character.
And he's actually based on like someone that in Lewis's life too. Like, wasn't he based on like one of the servants at the kilns?
The gardener?
The gardener at the kilns.
Yeah, it could be. So who must have been one of these insanely negative, you know, everything's always, the glass is half empty.
Yeah.
But then, heart of gold, you know?
Yeah, Douglas Gresham called him a cheerful eternal pessimist. Or something like that. So, and it's just such a, it's just fun too. And
cheerful eternal pessimist.
Yeah.
It's
Cause,
hilarious.
Yeah, because I mean, I love Puddleglum. He's such a good character. And he's such a mix of the funny, what things that get to me, like in books, movies, whatever, are they have such a good mix of, like, you can laugh hysterically, but then you can also be, like, on the edge of your seat, and then you can also cry at it, you know, the emotional roller coasters or whatever. Yeah, so, but yeah, so, I don't know. So what are some other, other things you like about it too?
Yeah, well, of course, there's interesting moments all along. There's the realization when the kids are in the castle of Harfang. That's what it's called.
I think that's Harfang.
Harfang. They're in the castle there, you know, the realization like, oh, we are actually being fattened up for stew or whatever. And then the escape. I also think about the motif that runs through the book that kind of going along with the escape from Harfang, but you often in life are encountering things that are not what they seem to be. They are evils. You kind of have a contradiction between the emerald. What is she called?
The Lady of the Green Kirtle.
Lady of the Green Kirtle. You have a contradiction between her and Puddleglum, for instance. In her case, she seems to be this absolutely wonderful, beautiful, whatever. And she's really this enchantress, and underneath she's this terrifying serpent.
Well, I know that's one thing that the BBC did well. I mean, I don't give them a lot of credit, but they did well. They cast her. She's the actress who plays her is gorgeous, and they had her, all dressed up beautifully. So it's the same kind of thing you said, the contrast. Like, she's so gorgeous on the outside, but she's completely evil.
Yeah. Underneath she's this serpent, and on the other hand, you have this goofy-looking, frog-like, weird, super depressing guy who actually underneath is as solid as anybody in the entire Chronicles.
Yeah.
From any of the books, he is one of the strongest characters, one of the clearest thinking, one of the most surprising. And I think Lewis loved that sort of motif through the books, like, this is not what it seems. You think of even like, the island where they encounter the waters that turn everything to gold, like, this is not what it seems. And I mean, he just has so many of those moments woven into the books. Core, Shasta is not who he seems, and
yeah.
just on and on it goes. So anyway, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I know I love I love the signs, and I know like Silverchair is one of those ones where it's really, you have to kind of look for the parallels to scripture or whatever, but you can just see how, how when they had taken their eyes off the prize and they got distracted, that's when they start getting into trouble and all that kind of stuff. But I love, see if I can, but how he says,
yeah,
this whole conversation, and he says, hold on, what I'm looking for. He said, okay, it says, but first remember the signs. Say them to yourself when you wake in the morning, when you lay down at night, when you wake in the middle of the night. Then he goes, and whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. And then he goes into like, I don't talk to you as clearly down in Narnia as I do up here on the mountain. It can be how it's like, God has given us the instructions, but we can choose to get away from them and forget, take our eyes off the prize.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are certain conditions that create better, what? There's certain things that create better conditions for hearing the voice of God. And sometimes those are outward circumstances that are happening. Sometimes that's turmoil. Sometimes it's prayer and fasting. There are ways we can amplify God's voice. But I'm just as prone to kind of go along with the Babylon Bee, when it has a headline that says, man who is sitting literally 3 feet from the Bible begs God to speak to him. Well,
yeah.
That's always, as a Christian, going to be the primary way that we interact with God's voice.
Yeah.
And who he is. And so, yeah, if we're like sitting around waiting for a prophetic message to zing us out of midair, yeah, does that stuff happen? It does.
Yeah.
But.
Or like the memes that are like, please God, give me a sign, and then it's like this person getting crushed, but not getting crushed, like the sign is like falling right on top of them, and it's like, and I mean, it's hilarious, it's hysterical, but it's also kind of like we can say, God can be like, yeah, here's the sign, it's right here, can't you see it? But we can choose to ignore it too. Because it doesn't fit, it's not what we wanted for a sign, or it doesn't fit into our
Right.
But we don't really want to do it, and we're procrastinating by saying, "Give me another sign. Give me another sign."
Yeah, kind of like Gideon.
Yes.
That was cool, but if we could rework the test, so that it's more difficult. Sometimes God will give us, almost literally give us a sign. But yeah, more often there are subtleties. His voice comes to us in subtleties. His I don't know, his voice will come through somebody else, or it will come through, maybe it's a radio personality or something, But I do think that there's something extremely important for the Christian to pay attention to, like in Puddleglum's speech to the serpent, or the witch, or the enchantress, or the lady of the green kirtle.
Yeah.
Kirtle.
Curdle.
Not girdle.
Curdle.
Yeah.
Curdle. No,
Okay.
not girdle. Not what
Yeah.
we wear to look skinny. No.
Girdle. It's curdle. What is a curdle?
I have no idea.
Yeah, good question.
It's what happens to milk.
Hello, Clive. What are you talking about? But in there he said, if you can find it,
Yeah.
at some point you can read it.
Yeah, I found it.
You got it? Okay.
Here, if you want to read it, you can read it too if you want. It's on right down there somewhere.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I mean, if you're watching this someday deep in the future and you have not read the book, you'll have to just read the book, because otherwise this entire conversation doesn't make sense. But
yeah.
When they get into this fight with the witch, she's of course weaving her spell through the sweet-smelling fragrance on the fire, and
they're making them, and they're tired. Come on, that's
hello,
people.
They're falling into this dreamlike state, and Puddleglum says, "One word, madam," he said, coming back from the fire after he's just stamped it out. All you've been saying is quite right, I shouldn't wonder. I'm a chap who always like to know the worst and then put the best face I can on it, which is an absurd thing for him to say. So I won't deny any of what you said, but there's one thing more to be said even so. Suppose we have only dreamed or made up all those things, trees and grass and sun, moon and stars and Aslan himself. Suppose we have. Then all I can say is that in that case, the made up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But 4 babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. That's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. So thanking you kindly for our supper, if these 2 gentlemen and the young lady are ready, we're leaving your court at once and setting out in the dark to spend our lives looking for Overland. Not that our lives will be very long, I should think, but that's small loss if the world's as dull a place as you say. And I think for the Christian, I'll hand that back to you. I think for the Christian, I have this idea in my head that starting out in the Christian life is easy in some ways. For a person who gets radically saved, we talk about the period where they're on fire for the Lord. They're passionate. There's a fire in their belly, and a far-off look in their eye. They're excited about faith, the things of God, reading the Word.
Or you think coming home from camp.
Coming home from camp, you're charged up. You are pumped.
Yes.
You've had an experience. We're so good in the Pentecostal church at the emotional experience, and that can carry us for a ways. I think ending can be easy. I think when a person sees their end is in sight, they can sort of rededicate, but there are all these years in between, and the phrase that comes back to me all the time, we always talk about how short life is, but there's this T.S. Eliot phrase from one of his poems where he says, "Life is very long." Life is very long. For a lot of people, there's a big middle chunk where faithfulness to God is so much harder, so much more important, I think. Like staying with staying with Aslan and Narnia when everybody, I feel like our society is doing this exact thing to us right now. They've thrown this sweet smelling incense on the fire, and they're just kind of lulling Christians to sleep with like some of it's doubt and cynicism. That stuff's so much baloney, you know, or some of it is just the approval of sin. Like, oh, come on, it's not really wrong, is it? I mean, people can do what they want, can't they? And we have so many Christians who are just like everybody in this book who are just like, huh, I guess you're probably right, folk, you know. And we need these people, these voices, these people who are like with clarity, the you know, calling the clarion call back to what is really reality all along. There really is an overland. There really is an Aslan. But when you are down in the dark, in the depths, it's easy to forget that.
Well, I know my dad had said something, like I think it was maybe it was a professor in college. I don't know who said it to him. But he said, you know, I'd much rather go through my entire life believing there is a God and find out there isn't, because then I'll just, you know, return to dust. But then go through my whole life saying, there isn't a God, and then finding out there is. And I feel like that's so much what the Polygon was saying. Well, so what if we've supposed it and we die looking for it? Who cares?
Oh, well.
Because this is awful. But if we go through life saying, there isn't, this is all we have, and then we find out there is, how much have we missed?
Right. Yeah, it's Pascal's wager all over again. It's you lose nothing and gain everything in a belief in God if it's true, and if it's not true, if there is no God, then you lose nothing by that.
Yeah.
If you believed all along in a fairy tale, quote unquote, and it gave you hope, it gave you some moral guidance.
So if there's no afterlife, well then we just cease to exist. That's what atheists say. You know.
Exactly, but if they're wrong,
which they are
to
wrong.
put it mildly, that's a real bummer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we screw up our eternity. I always say, like, you know, when they talk about, it's like as we're getting into this time where we're gonna have to make like life and death choices. It's like, so what if I screw up a few years here on Earth, or quote unquote screw up? I'd rather suffer here on Earth and have all of my eternity than bend and then mess up my eternity.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting way that he weaves this, you know. The longer you go in these scenarios where you're in the dark, trudging along, not seeing the breakthrough, you know, and it's important too, I think, that when they finally come out into Overland, back into Narnia, they literally break through a bank of dirt, right, and snow.
Yeah, because
they like bust out in the middle of this
snowball fight, basically.
Snowball fight, yeah.
Because Jill like just sticks her head out. Because I think from what I'm putting two and two together, I think the Queen had like tunneled. They had tunneled right up to the edge, and then they were gonna break it out right as the army was gonna go through. So there was just a little hole, so Jill was like looking out, and then she somehow like falls down the hill. I think that's what happens. It's hard to understand, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah, falls down this embankment right where the tunnel came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's just his reminders that the enemy is devious and scheming and trying to, you know, even things like that, tunnel under, and all of a sudden hit you with a surprise attack and you know, you think of those tunnels in your own life, in your own heart, where the enemy, you've given place to the enemy through sin or whatever.
To just erode away. Yeah,
to just erode away underneath your firm foundations, what you think are firm foundations. So again, it's easy to see a lot of parallels to the modern Christian life.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I was thinking another thing I love is you know, when, I mean, I love how they gotten off track and how they go through what is the ruined city, and they don't realize it at the time, and then Jill sees it like in a dream, right? Or does she have a dream about it? Was she actually, it was like a waking dream, so she was actually, you know, kind of a vision or whatever, and she sees that the words were there, and then it's like and then like they're looking at it the next day, and then she's like, no, then Eustace said, it's worse than that. You were in one of the letters because she had fallen down into a tunnel too, and it's just like
Right.
so he's like, it's kind of again like looking for the sign. It's like it's right under your nose. But you don't see it, or you would choose to ignore it.
Can't see the forest for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the silver chair, yeah, it's just a great reminder that I don't know, there are those who can help us in that long middle part of life to wake up sometimes, you know. I think of Revelation 3, is it?
Sounds about right.
Or 2, where
I think it's 3.
the call to the church in Sardis is wake up. Wake up.
And they've been taken over because the guards had literally fallen asleep.
Right. Yeah. They had both fallen asleep at the same time. You know, I mean, a Christian falling asleep here or there is one thing. You know, I remember preaching on the passage in Acts 20 too about Eutychus falling out the window. Nobody else in that room noticed that he was falling into it, not just like a little bit of a doze. He was like out cold.
Yeah.
And falls out the window. And I think too often, you know, these days we are numbed by one anesthetic after another. There are so many different sweet smelling aromas on the fire, the sleepy fire, you know, whether it's just our obsession with entertainment or whether it's our phones or whatever, you know, you fill in the blank. I mean, we are so sleepy so much of the time. And it certainly seems like going into the future, we are going to be faced as the church with a lot of very stark challenges to, like, are you going to say yes to this and live the worldly way, or are you going to stamp out the fire and wake up and follow the Lord, for crying out loud?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I remember that sermon. I think you also kind of brought up like the whole, you know, like I said, you sit on the fringes, nobody notices. So we can do that so often in the Christian life. Like we can forget about someone, or they can just slip off. You know, they can just be leaving the faith, and we don't even notice because we're so caught up in the doing and the making things just right. Right,
or we're just, you know, somebody recently who has not been coming to church for quite some time because of COVID. I was talking with them and they said, well, besides you, only one other person has called to find out what's going on. And I just said, well, that has less to do with people not caring than you think. But a big part of it is that people attend church so sporadically, so seldom in a lot of cases, that they don't even realize that you're not coming anymore. You know, if 1 out of 4 Sundays is normal church attendance now, which it is for a lot of people, you wouldn't. How many months would have to go by before you're like attending once a month before you're like, oh yeah, they're not here.
Or if they're like, or they can just figure, well, they just haven't been coming or whatever.
Or they would just think they're probably there on weeks that I'm not.
Yeah.
But how many people even attend church regularly enough to be able to say, hey, we haven't seen you in 2 months?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that person's only been there twice in 2 months themselves. So there would be 6 or 7 Sundays where they wouldn't even know if you weren't there. You know,
well, I remember something. I mean, it was like, this was years ago, but it's like several years ago because it was like, maybe I was in 8th grade and it's still like fixed in my mind. You know, my parents are friends with your parents and whatever, and they had, and like, we had just hadn't been coming to church every Sunday, and your parents had been coming to church every Sunday, and my mom was talking to you about something else. She's like, Seth, I have to ask, where have your parents been? Because she was literally like, I haven't seen them. Have they laughed at me? I know they probably have, but where are they? And then we saw them the next day, and she was like, I had to ask your son about you because I was worried. I hadn't seen you in forever. Or something like that. They were like, and it was literally something like, well, we'd just been there on opposite Sundays because it'd been like 6 weeks. And again, it was the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been at church even 1 month at a time, just on different Sundays.
I don't remember what year it was, but I do remember there was a stretch where my parents were gone. I think my mom was gone 9 Sundays in a row because there was like a wedding out west. My cousin got married, and they were out there a couple weeks, and it was just ding, 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 ding right in a row, which happens occasionally.
Does too.
But so often now a person's like, hey, we got new lake property, and then they're not there all summer, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll re-engage. I've heard this from more than one family. We'll re-engage again when fall rolls around. Fat chance. They never do. They rarely, I should say.
Well, you can always take a heated blanket out to the lake place and stay there in the fall too.
Why not? So it's like, I think very seldom are you going to be in the presence of a serpent, a literal serpent, who's lulling you into hypnosis. Little by little, speaking softly. Yeah. All that Narnia stuff is just a bunch of. But we have very different looking scenarios that we face. That's like, here, don't you want to just sleep? Don't you want to just relax? Don't you want to just whatever?
Or like, Or like, I don't know, we went through that whole thing on the progressive Christianity. Sometimes the serpent can be the leader of the church saying, come on, I mean, it's just, suffering's not from God. And if God really loved you, this wouldn't happen. And,
right.
Well, I mean, whatever. All the points that they make too are, the Bible's great, but it's not really, not the authentic Word of God.
Right.
Or it's not all 100% God's Word, because they say it like contains God's Word, or what do they say?
Yeah. It depends who you're talking to.
Yeah.
I think most of them, it's a slow fade. Mm-hmm. Kind of like it is here, I mean, they started out alert, and then they get lulled.
Are you talking about when they first started on their journey too?
Yeah, but I mean, even in that scene, they, whatever, they may have known when they walked into that room exactly who this was and exactly who they were. And you just, little by little, you capitulate, you give in. You start saying, yeah, that's probably okay, that's okay. Yeah, we don't really have to follow God's standard here. We do over here. The greatest of these is love, and love means letting people do whatever they want, which means whatever. And, by the way, I don't like how God is in the Old Testament, or I don't like how God does this, that, or the other thing. You know what I like? I like a few of the teachings of Jesus. That's what I can hang my hat on. And eventually you get rid of those too, right? So.
Yeah, it's just it's just so many good lessons in there too.
Yeah, but you gotta have the person who's willing to stamp on the fire and be like, hey, tell me, what are you doing?
Yeah, you need those. Yeah, you need those.
You have to have those watchmen on the wall, like Ezekiel was called to be.
Yeah, really.
You have to.
Yeah, and you have to have and maybe that's the accountability partner that is just like, whenever you gotta have someone who loves you enough to say, slap you on the side of the head and say, wake up. Like
exactly.
Or like, well, yeah, I mean, it's like, not this time about physically falling asleep, but I know when we watched The Lord of the Rings that one night, and next morning, I was like stumbling out, and I'm just like, and I was awake when I took a shower. I'm like, Mom, if you see me sleeping, just poke me in the ribs.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I was surprised I made it through the service without falling asleep. Not because you're boring, but just because I was tired. But it's really
yes, I had to get up and preach that day. So.
Yeah, so you could.
Yeah.
If you see me sleeping.
So I know I went to bed early that following night because I was like, holy cow.
But anyway,
I can't do this anymore. I'm too old. But yeah, you want to talk about great lessons about good and evil and whatever, keeping your. We'll see some of that in the Two Towers. Keeping your defenses intact. Yeah. You can't do that when you are. Now they did it out of necessity, but so many Christians do it, and it's not out of necessity. You put yourself in harm's way. You put yourself in a situation where you're going to experience things that are going to dull your senses to the reality of God, and then you're like, why don't I believe this stuff anymore? Well, because you have practiced years of throwing yourself under the bus, spiritually speaking, constantly in the wrong company, listening to the wrong voices, and then maybe even doing other things like abusing your body through whatever. A lot of my friends, that's kind of how it starts. Like they get careless in the things that they put into their mind, into their body, and the people that they're around. And guess what? It's the age-old thing that you tell your kid when they're 13 or 14. Like, you show me your friends,
And I'll show you your future.
Exactly. Or garbage in, garbage out. I mean, it just, these things, parents say them because they really are true too. Bad company really does corrupt good character. Or it can provide a way out.
Yeah.
Like that's what happened with one of my friends, man. I mean, he started hanging around the worst people. And now I was just talking to him this fall, and he's like, well, I couldn't be, by any stretch of the imagination, considered a Christian anymore. I don't believe this stuff anymore. It's a slow process. It happens over time.
Yeah.
It's not just poof, I threw it on the fire, now you're all out cold and I can do what I will. It's
and I mean,
it's a process that you choose to be part of most of the time.
Yeah, and I know with we don't really touch on Rillian, who's kind of a central figure of this book, but it's so interesting. You see, I mean, I love the theory that the Lady of the Green Kirtle, killed his mother to enchant him eventually, but I don't know. And then how she gets him when he's grieving, when he's not thinking clearly, and that can that's. I mean, I don't know, that happens to a lot of people during tragedy. It can push them away from God. And then Narnian is like, let me go with you. I want to see what's going on. And then he keeps thinking, well, should I tell the king? Should I tell the king? Should I tell the king? And then he chooses not to. And then Rillian disappears, and he's plagued with guilt forever about what I did. And I think that can happen so easily. Well, I don't know, I really should go talk to that person, but I'm not sure if that's a good idea. And you can make a mistake that'll, change everything for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, we are often given opportunity with people, and I think it's one of the great downfalls of most Christians in the West, that when given an opportunity to boldly speak of Christ to somebody, we're so hesitant. Like up in this area, we just never want to put anybody out. We never want to make anybody uncomfortable. We never want to...
But we don't want to make ourselves uncomfortable.
That's really what it comes down to. It's a fear of man, and I don't want to be uncomfortable or vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, I know, I've talked about this a lot, but I watched Hacksaw Ridge, which is a great movie, by the way. I just remember...
Brought to you by Hacksaw Ridge. No.
I just remember bawling, my eyes just bawling during this one scene where he goes back to get all these men that have been left up on the ridge, and you see him running, and there's the smoke is shooting up from the foxholes. They just shot this brilliantly, and I'm just just sitting there bawling, because I'm like, all right, I was very emotional. I'm like, he's literally running as close as you can get to, about as close as you can get to hell on earth. We talk about this is hell, this is hellish, very hellish place to get men who had been mean to him, who had been awful to him. They'd beaten him to a pulp and done all these things. And I could be like, I don't know if I want to have that conversation with my coworker or with my friend, because it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. And I'm like, it kind of almost brings you to shame. It makes you just feel a good healthy dose of shame, because you're like,
right.
What's wrong with me? I'm not having these uncomfortable conversations when someone was literally going into, hell on earth to get.
Yeah. And I mean that, for how many soldiers is there one guy like that? For how many Christians is there one person who's going to do whatever it takes? Be as uncomfortable, put themselves in as much awkward, we're not even talking about life and death here, we're talking about awkward.
Which is kind of like the life and death to the Western church sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, because the fear of man is so crippling in the Western church. And we just don't have, the stakes are just not high enough, or something in our minds where, I would so much rather be awkward here on earth in attempting to share the love of Jesus with somebody than get to heaven and have the awkward conversation be there with Jesus saying, I gave you opportunity with this one. What happened? I don't want the crickets chirping because of that conversation, so it's hard. We just need more of the presence of the Holy Spirit, right, to embolden us to do what he calls us to do. So
and I know, just briefly going back to Rillian, I know how I love about how when he's free from the enchantment, that whole thing where the first thing he does is he destroys the evil chair that's been holding him, and then you just kind of see, it's kind of like how someone who, when they are set free from their sin or whatever, they can really do that 180, boom, and he becomes into like this, and he's saying things like, whether we live or die, Aslan will be our true Lord, and all that kind of stuff. And that's such a beautiful picture of what can become when someone's either like, maybe they've actually had the demonic presence, or they've become to faith. It's just a lovely picture to me too.
Yeah, and you think of somebody like Mary Magdalene, out of whom 7 demons were driven, and her devotion to Jesus, her following of him, her providing for his needs, her love, her deep and abiding love, born out of the fact that she was set free from such bondage. It's just beautiful.
She's in the first season of The Chosen, right?
She is, yeah. She's kind of a central character. I haven't watched all of it, but she's pretty central to what's going on. So
that's because I remember how they go show her. I think she's just like, I've only watched it like once, but this dirty, bedraggled.
Yeah.
The one everyone just like, I'm just gonna skirt around this person. I'm gonna steer clear.
Gonna skirt around her, and I'm gonna skirt around Matthew over here as well.
Yeah, and then I think like Nicodemus had like gone and talked to her, and he was trying to set her free, but he gets scared, and because it's too much for him. And then when he sees her, I think doesn't he say like, "Are you the same woman?" or something like that? He's not even sure because she's so different.
Right.
Too.
It's kind of a what in the world happened to you. But yeah, I mean, I think of the parable, or I think of Jesus saying, now, which of these two will love the one more? Is he saying that to the Pharisees? I don't know, but they say, well, the one who was forgiven more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. The devotion and love will be there, and you do see that kind of a burn the ship sort of a thing, just like Elisha. That life is done, and just so I'm not tempted to go back there, I'm going to burn the equipment and kill the oxen and
I mean that's
have a feast.
That's the whole message of the song. How they're like this. Excuse me. Like Explorer was like. I mean, the Canadian country's talking about it, and they're like, it wasn't a good place. It wasn't a comfortable place. But it was familiar. And I'm like, hello, Western Church. Hello, Christians. Where it's like, it's so easy to be like, and it's not necessarily like, and, we can, put ourselves like, oh, I'm above that. That's talking about the sinners. No, it's talking about the people where it's like, you're stuck in the same mindset. And then we're supposed to, you're supposed to burn the ships and step into the new day.
Yeah.
And rise up from the dust and walk away.
Yeah, which is not easy.
No.
So, Lord help us.
Yeah.
But the Silver Chair is chock full of good stuff. And that's the book that we are reading next, Jonas and Me. So it'll be fun to see all this stuff again as we work our way through it. But I'm going to wrap up.
Yeah.
So